Well, gentlemen, here we are going back to the Badger State of Wisconsin, and this one goes back for me, it's got to be 12, 14 years of knowledge to put us in this position now, because early when I first got this farm, I guess I should backtrack. It's predominantly ag, which is the farm itself is predominantly ag, and everything around it is predominantly ag. And when we first had purchased it, I was hunting in early season and mid-season, not having a whole lot of luck, obviously, because there's so much food around the cover, and it's just impossible, right? So once I realized that we're just better off planting and planning for late season opportunity is when our success completely changed.
That's got to feel weird, given the fact that of all the places you hunt, this is the one closest to the house.
That we hunt the least.
That you hunt the least.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's because it's so difficult to hunt until, call it post-Christmas.
Until food becomes limited.
Yes.
That gets consistent, and you have the ability to control where food gets left.
Yep. We sit down with the farmer every fall, and we map out on X of what we want left, and he leaves it, and we buy it back from him. And, you know, Casey, we do some rye.
Yeah, every year, you know, late summer, early fall, about, you know, call it a month prior to the first frost, a little bit longer than that. We go in and broadcast cereal grains within the rows of whatever. It could be beans, could be corn, depending on what row crop they went with that year. But what the best part about that is it just starts to establish that traffic pattern. The deer start going there to feed for the cereal grains, and they know that there's a food source there. So when the crops all come off and that standing grain is there, they're already aware of the area. They're conscious of the fact that the food is right there. So it ends up lending itself. It sets it up to be better in the late season.
It's so funny because we, you know, obviously we're running reveal cameras out there, and once the combines start running in our neighborhood, the cameras just start picking up, you know, and then we obviously get ours pulled off, harvested, and then we have what's left. And about that December 10th, it really starts ramping up. And then we wait for snow, we wait for cold fronts, and we typically don't get in there until sometime in January based on the intel and obviously mature bucks showing up.
Are the deer that you're harvesting in January, are you seeing them throughout the fall, or do you think they're traveling in? How far do you think these deer might be coming?
Both.
Okay.
Both. We've had some come and go. We had a really large one we lost last year that we were targeting, and then he obviously got pulled off. But when you have that much food, because we usually leave 3 to 4 acres of standing grain, and nothing else is around us. I mean, nothing.
Right.
It is, you know, when we go sit, it could be 35 deer a night. It could be 65 deer a night.
Yeah, we've had several occasions where we've harvested deer, and then the neighbors that are quite a distance away will come up like, man, I had pictures of them. So, you know, they're harboring these deer, housing these deer during the season, and then when the late season kicks in, over they come, which is interesting to see how far they'll travel.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I would like to know, you know, in the one case he's talking is about 1.5 miles. So we really know how far the does and so forth that we can't identify how far we're really pulling. But I think it's much larger than we understand.
I agree.
I agree. We have a farm that we hunt that's similar in the fact that it's very open landscape and it's got limited crop, but it's just vast acres of either pasture, or it could be crop that gets cut for silage. And I remember one year my brother, we had a buck that we were trying to target, and it was like, no, we need to pull back. And it ended up being that when he finally harvested the buck, it was about 160. It was traveling over a mile each night from where it was bedding way over on the neighbor to get to the crop that was on the farm that we had permission to hunt. Just huge range.
Yeah, I mean, and we've experienced that same thing because they need to bed where there is adequate bedding during winter cold months. They have to seek out quality bedding areas. Yeah. And they have to have quality food. So it often results in that long, travel course.
So let's go to the Onyx map and let's talk about that, to Casey's point, because once we identified this was our strategy, right? Yeah. We went in there and you can see the red outlines that we did a completely timber stand improvement and increased the bedding by a factor of 100 on both those sections. So once they found it, they stayed.
Yeah.
And we didn't give them a reason to leave.
Right. You're
They
making
didn't
the
have to
property stickier, basically giving them the ability where there's food and there's cover to where they're naturally sticking to that property.
Yes. So we took advantage of, even those are small, island timber plots, we maximize as much as we could based on where we're going to leave the food. And obviously that's where we left the food is based on predominantly wind directions of being north, northwest that time of year. So we're going to put on the south end of the property.
Yeah, and you come in from the south, slip
Exactly.
in, and you just pop in
And
right
everything's
to
to the
edge
west and everything's to the north.
Play into the strength too. Like it's going to get cold in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
You don't need to rush into this setup. There's enough food. Just wait for the right conditions, and the deer will. The more that they can get conditioned and comfortable coming to that food resource, because most of these hunts in the years past, and I believe this one is more later into January, correct?
100%. Yeah, it's always mid to late January.
Yeah. So there's no sense in rushing it. The food's not going away. Just let them get super comfortable.
Which actually fell into our strategy because the state of Wisconsin 3 years ago, am I wrong, or is it 2 years ago,
I think
Casey?
it was 3 years ago.
3 years ago, they actually extended the deer season into January.
Okay.
In our county.
In our county, that's correct. Not statewide, but in our county because the deer density is so high.
Gotcha.
And so once we saw that even more, we this even plays into our strategy even better, right? Because the longer it plays out, the food becomes more harder to find, and our deer density just increases. So it's an interesting strategy, and I think that's what the bigger takeaway from this is try not to fight the farm against what's giving you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just go with it, but have the discipline to stay out until it tells you it's time to go in. And we only hunt it 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah. It's the opposite of what we talked about going back to Seth Harker's hunt, where it was like it's good early. After that, it's only going to get worse because of
Well, then you better focus early.
You better focus early. For you guys, it's going to be better the longer you wait. So just wait till later.
Yep, exactly. One of the interesting point, guys, that we haven't touched on that we've learned over the years through trial and error is the size of the food of the grain, whether it's beans or corns that we're buying back. Sometimes having too much is actually your worst enemy because for us, for planning purposes, we know we're going to have a bow in hand that time of year. So if you have too much, obviously it's going to spread that out, and we got to try to figure out how we're going to get them to move within archery range. So
that's an additional cost.
It's additional cost, but also we're always trying to find that fine line between deer density and managing that. So we're constantly
winter severity. You don't know if you have
100%.
Cold temps settle in for a week.
So every year we're constantly plus or minus making adjustments, and that's one thing that having too much food in the late season can be a negative. So you got to really dial that in over years and pay attention to that.
Yeah. Along with the fact that when we spread those cereal grains in early, it gives them 2 food sources. And we'll see they come in and dig for that. They'll feed on the grain, stand out there feeding, and then come and check out and get a little different bite. As you know, deer are browsers. So it creates that, almost green to grain type deal for us. So, to kind of suck them down closer into bow range. And that's what happened on this hunt, and it worked out perfectly.
I just like the preconditioning of those deer to that. Everyone thinks, oh my gosh, standing corn, that's enough. That's great. You just made it a little bit better, and you made them transition to that earlier on than, that late January time frame by having that cereal grain.
It's so interesting. We really saw the huge change when we obviously leave in food, but we saw a bigger change when we did all the TSI work because it's one thing to get them there for a couple, 3 days and they may move on, but we were smart enough to do all that timber stand improvement so once they did come, they had no reason to leave.
Yeah. To piggyback off your point, that TSI right there, Wisconsin is a very high pressure hunting state.
They are.
We have a lot of trouble seeing deer and getting them on their feet in daylight. So for us to put bedding really far away from our food sources, it just won't work for us. Everything will be after dark. So, Greg's idea and all the stuff in the construction of the TSI allows them to bed in a position to where we will have daylight activity be able to get a shot.
To Casey's point, to give you an idea of pressure, we have over 550,000 hunters on opening day of gun season in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Somewhere between 550 and 600,000. So you can just imagine the amount of pressure the state gets on opening day that then trickles obviously through the rest of the year.
Yeah.
So we really have to bring that bedding really tight to us and make sure that our exit and entry is really bulletproof because we've got to get them close because they don't like being on their feet in daylight that much.
Do you guys like to hunt before, during, or after big cold front when it comes to late season here Is there a time window, or are you just looking at pressure in that time frame?
We're talking about Wisconsin, so when we're saying cold front, I just believe in that it's naturally
Relative.
cold. Are we talking about those polar vortex?
Yes.
Well,
coming?
what was it? It was low teens, or was it single digits when we harvested this deer? It
Single digit. When
it
it
was
gets to that
cold.
late, the colder, the better.
Yeah.
The hungrier
And
they
snow.
are. Yes,
And bringing snow.
And snow to
We had
cover
a fresh
the ground.
snow. Yep.
For sure. And I mean, the colder, the better. What I prefer is not during the storm, but
Sure.
once the storm passes and the cold temps have hung around and the wind is not super high for them in that late season, and the sun comes out, it's a bluebird day, the
yes.
storm's blowing through, and it's nice.
Movement's great.
And it's a recipe for disaster for
after.
the deer. Yeah,
Yeah.
right on the back end.
That's my general rule of thumb. It's like I just want to. They're going to hunker down some, especially the wind, the snow blowing. But once it breaks,
They're on their feet.
they
Yes.
have to feed.
They
Every
got to
time.
go.
Energy reserves are down, tanked.
Yep.
And you saw it in this hunt. The first sit, it was snowing. That front was still lingering around. We had very little activity. One day later, 24 hours later, we're back in there and we're lousy with deer. I mean,
But it's
crazy amount of
interesting. It's not only deer, but we had, 30 turkeys?
Yes.
25 turkeys. So it's just the whole wildlife in general is like, hello, today's the day. It's a bluebird day. The storm's passed. Let's go eat.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting how you can just read that.
I think some people tend to think, oh, it's going to be harsh and nasty. I want to be, but just
Just
in the back
on the backside of
just
that.
on the backside of that.
Yeah, no doubt.
Very true. Well, we just finished up the complete breakdown of this entire hunt. Check out the link to see the whole thing go down.